All right, guys. So today we're going to be talking about rhetoric, which you may or may not be familiar with. Maybe you've never heard of rhetoric before. Maybe you have. It doesn't really matter. We're going to be learning about it this week. So rhetoric is speech making. It's when you're trying to convince somebody of something. You're trying to make some sort of argument and convince your audience of it. There's a couple different techniques that are very specific to rhetoric. We call these rhetorical techniques. Pathos, ethos, and logos, which I'm going to be talking about here on the next slide. Repetition is hugely important in speech making, right? So Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech is one of the most famous examples of that, especially evidenced by the fact that we all can reference the "I Have a Dream" speech and we know exactly what it is that we're talking about because he repeats that phrase over and over and over again to provide emphasis, right, about about that hope, right? So it just, kind of strengthens the speech so much. Figurative language is the use of like metaphor, simile, hyperbole, that kind of thing to kind of strengthen your speech. Vivid imagery is exactly what it sounds like. It's kind of creating a word picture using sensory descriptions and details. And then rhetorical questions, which are questions that do not expect an answer, right? They're phrased as a question, but they're not really like part of a back and forth. Pathos, ethos, and logos is part of what we call the rhetorical triangle. They're all Greek roots. So pathos is where you use your emotion to try and persuade your audience. So I'm going to use the same issue for all three of these, right? And to show you how you can use pathos, ethos, and logos on one issue kind of interchangeably. So my issue is that I think the speed limit in front of my house is too fast. I think it should be slowed down. So if I'm using pathos as an example, as a way to kind of sway my audience, then I might talk about a heartbreaking story of a child who was playing in front of their house, wandered into the road, got hit by a car that didn't see them because they were going too fast because, again, the speed limit was so high. And the kid ended up paralyzed and in a wheelchair. So this kid's entire life was changed because of this speed limit. Okay, so I'd be using pathos. Ethos is where you establish yourself as an authority, right? Or someone to be trusted or listened to. A lot of times we'll see this as like celebrity endorsement. And sometimes it's even kind of going the opposite. So our politicians will often use ethos where they try to make themselves seem like an everyday person, as opposed to like an authority, right? Like, oh, I'm just like you, which makes you want to trust them. So it can work kind of both directions. So again, if I'm using ethos for that same issue, I want to slow down the speed limit in front of my house. Maybe I would bring in people who are authorities on the subject. So I might bring in somebody who works in infrastructure or somebody whose job it is to decide what the speed limit is in certain zones. Or I might bring in a police officer to talk about kind of the things that they have seen on the job. And I would use them to try and sway my audience. Logos is when you use logic, facts, statistics, whatever, to convince your audience that you're right. So if I was using logos for that same issue, then I would bring out a whole bunch of statistics talking about how we see if we decrease the speed on a road, then we also see a corresponding decrease in accidents, both with people, with other cars, and with animals, right? So showing that it makes it safer for everybody. So a good speech, it would use one more than the other three, but would still use all three. If you have a speech that's all pathos, you have no logic and no authority, then it's not very useful, right? And same with the other three. You can't just use one. You have to use all three to try and convince your audience of things. So below this PowerPoint and below this video, I've attached 3 YouTube videos for 3 different advertisements. And your job is to watch them. And then after each one, I want you to write down the examples of pathos, ethos, and logos that each one uses and find as many as you possibly can, all right, for each ad. And then at the end, I want you to tell me which one leans most heavily toward pathos, which one leans most heavily toward ethos, and which one leans most heavily toward logos. And then you'll submit that to Canvas, okay? Let me know if you guys have any questions. Bye.